Everybody, I'm going to break a little bit with the TEDx etiquette, and I'm going to use my notes because I found out about this on Wednesday, so I hope you'll forgive me. But yes, thank you for the introduction. My name is Robin Slocombe, and I am the Technology Director for SLB, a global technology company driving energy innovation for a balanced planet. And I'm here to talk about turning industry challenges into success opportunities. And for my industry, energy, I think this graph is the best representation of that challenge. You can see here on the screen oil demand and the increase of oil demand starting back from 1980. And as our standard of living has improved, as global population has grown, and our economies have advanced, that increase in oil demand has driven on relentlessly up until you can see the current day. My career has charted a lot of that growth as well. So I started with SLB back in 1998, and apart from a couple of hiccups around 2009 and a small financial crisis, I've ridden that wave right the way up to today, where I'm now in the Middle East, continuing to drive oil and gas innovation. Now, this growth has had consequences. And with all of that hydrocarbon produced and burned, we've generated an enormous amount of carbon dioxide over the last 100 years. And we've created more carbon dioxide than nature can absorb. As a result of that, that carbon dioxide has accumulated in the atmosphere. It's had a greenhouse warming effect. And as we stand right now today, we are already facing an average global increase in temperature of around about 1 degree Celsius. So that cold black line is the path of history. Why does it get so colorful as we go forward? And the second half of the chart is where some of the world's greatest minds in finance, energy, academia have tried to forecast the future as to where this picture is going, tried to identify where the peak is coming in that demand and where it will go from there. And as you can see, it's an incredible range of possibilities. As much as an 80% decrease by 2050, or in some scenarios, as much as a 20% increase. So if I asked you today to invest your future or your money in a company, and I told you it could grow by 20% or it could decline by 80%, I'm imagining you're probably going to put your money somewhere else. And then at the same time, these incredible advances in quality of life that we're all enjoying here right now, they're still only available to a very small minority. So my industry's greatest challenge, closely linked to mankind's greatest challenge, is how do we navigate this energy transition balanced with everybody having an equitable standard of living? And how do we turn that challenge into a success opportunity? So I turned to my latest thinking partner, ChatGPT. And then I paused for a moment. I thought, well, actually, I've only started using ChatGPT recently. Previously, I would have probably used Google. And then I sort of charted back, and the answer started to form in my mind as to how we were going to go about addressing this, even before I'd finished the prompt. And the answer is adaptability. Or to actually use Nassim Nicholas Taleb's word, antifragility. You see, my journey has charted that of the industry very closely in both successes and challenges. And after some reflection, I realized there are three things that have brought me here and will hopefully create new opportunities for my industry in this next chapter. And I'd like to talk to you today a little bit more about embracing that uncertainty, escaping my zone of comfort, and continuous learning. So it's important to really appreciate just how volatile and uncertain. It was me that switched the slides off. It's
It's okay.
yeah, no, it's me that's switching them off. Okay, they're off. It's important to appreciate just how uncertain the world and volatile the world is in which we live. You know, when I'm drilling holes in the ground and looking back at the geology over eons from the sensors that we get from the bottom of oil wells, you can really get a sense for, you know, how much change is continuously going on. My career has taken me to 10 countries around the world, and living in those countries has shown me just how turbulent and challenging daily life can be. But this volatility, this continual pace of change, it's natural. And you know, what we see in the natural landscape, in the economic landscape, is there and will persist. I'll never forget the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey in Houston in 2017. What you see there is just one of many beautiful neighborhoods, absolutely beautiful neighborhoods that had never experienced flooded before. Until then, they'd had, you know, very, very good flood protection. But they were inundated by up to about a height of about 2 meters. So in the aftermath, after the water had drained away, I joined several teams where we went into people's houses and we worked with families to sift through the wreckage of their homes. Every house had to be cleared out inside to a 50-centimeter height above where the floodwaters had reached. And we had to strip all of that out and throw it out onto the street to be disposed of. There was everything there. There's children's toys, there's photo albums, but in amongst all of it was this overwhelming sentiment that we're coming back stronger. And that night, I went home and I looked at my family who's here today, and I saw them, you know, safe and dry, and I saw our little world, and I realized just how important that was, and how important it was to protect that, but also how fragile it was, and how we had to be able to adapt and learn to adapt. You see, change is absolutely continuous, and whether it is AI or Gen Z vocabulary or climate change, it will always start with a lot of hype. You know, you've all heard the climate change hype. You've all heard the AI, you know, our jobs are going to go away. You know, the floods are coming. You've seen the movies. We're not going to the Gen Z vocabulary hype. We're not going to understand our teenagers. And then that hype typically dies down. But the changes persist. And they continue in the background. And if you ignore them and you forget about them, you will find that the change catches up with you. The AI bot comes in and does take your job. Your teenage children do start calling you bro instead of dad. And you know, climate change will see your house washed away. So these shocks, this uncertainty, it's enough to send us driving back under the covers. But the next thing I learned is that we have to get out there and experience the bad, or we miss the amazing. So within 4 months of joining SLB, I was posted to Colombia. And within 2 months of arriving there, I was managing a team of operators working on wells deep in the jungle. No one spoke English. The mosquitoes were about the size of small birds. And it was an experience that changed me forever. When I mentioned earlier Nassim Nicholas Taleb and his book Antifragile, and he had to invent a new word, because if I asked you what the opposite of fragile was, you'd probably say something that was strong or resilient. But that doesn't really quite capture it. You see, something that's fragile is destroyed by volatility. Something that's strong, resilient, remains unchanged by volatility. What he was looking for was something that is enhanced, something that gets better, something that grows as a result of volatility. And that's what anti-fragility is about. So when I arrived in Colombia, instead of trying to preserve a little bit of England in the Amazon, instead of patiently trying to teach my team to learn English so that we could communicate, I decided to dive right in. Until then, for me, languages had just been another subject in school. So you'd go from 1 + 2 = 3 to je plus suis equals I am. You know, that was language for me. But I realized then in the jungle, in la selva, that the language took on a completely new meaning. I realized that my Spanish accent was better if I smiled, and that changed the way that I thought. I learned jokes that probably shouldn't be and definitely couldn't be translated into English because of the structure of the words. And I used to lay in bed at night trying to perfect my r, which I got it in the end. I still knew who I was, but I changed, gaining a new strength from the disruption and learning the value of leaving my zone of comfort. And without that experience, I wouldn't have met my wife, who's sitting here today, and my life would have looked very, very different. So that idea of a zone of comfort actually comes from mice. Yerkes-Dodson's law back in 1907, they experimented to see how mice behaved as they were drawn out of a state of boredom and put through sort of increasing anxiety. And what they found was that as the level of stress increased, we moved out of that zone of boredom into this optimal zone of growth and learning. And over time, that zone there has actually been divided into a learning area and a growth area. The thing is, as we move out of our zone of comfort, and we're in that growth and learning area, we'll find that we become more comfortable with it. And in fact, our zone of comfort will grow. Now that's really, really important because as that grows, it keeps us away from the state of panic, where stress takes over and our performance decreases. But also in a volatile world, if you're not growing, if you're not learning, this zone of comfort is shrinking. And the panic and the stress of the world will encroach upon you. Which brings me to the last point I want to make on turning challenges into successes, and that's continuous learning. Accepting volatility and uncertainty, leaving your comfort zone, exposure to new experiences, and being forced to adapt is not enough. To protect yourself, to be prepared and manage risk, there needs to be an intention and a persistence to your learning. For me, the most transformative learning experience has been learning to listen. So as a trained engineer, when I was put out into the field, managing teams in multiple different environments, I got very good at telling people what to do. And it wasn't until I started a career in sales within the same company that I found myself in some very uncomfortable situations, trying to tell customers what they should be buying. I had to quickly retreat back into the classroom and learn to listen, and take the time to understand people's drivers and their needs through really properly listening to them. And since then, I've taken that even further. I've taken training in coaching, and I've adapted my leadership style to listen to how to listen to my team and the people that I'm working with, so that we can best come together and follow the direction that we have set. And so that listening has then turned into even more learning. So with that, I want to come back to our industry challenge. You know, the incredible uncertainty that the energy industry is facing as we transition away from fossil fuels. How are we going to do it? As I said, the first thing, embrace the volatility. The one thing I can guarantee from this chart is that, and especially from all of these forecasts, is that reality will not follow any of those lines. You know, we will find our own way through this. We've seen governments announce their commitments. We've seen companies declare these net zero targets, and now we're starting to see people pull back from that. At SLB, we adopted a strategy around balance. And since I and we are not the ones that are creating the waves of volatility, we need to find a way to be able to ride those with our teams, with our technology, and adapt to all of these different situations as they arise. The next thing we need to do, get out of our zone of comfort. In order to ride the waves, you've got to get your feet wet. I must make the measured steps into these new environments, develop new technologies, explore new markets, and get exposure to the new shape of our industry and the neighboring ones. I need to understand where else I can apply my existing skills outside of the oil and gas industry, who my new customers could be, and what their drives and challenges might be. And I need to stay ahead with my learning. I need to be listening for the new trends, the learning opportunities, and hopefully I'll hear how I turned industry challenges into success opportunities. Thank you very much for listening.